The rain had been falling since dawn, washing the streets in a dull silver sheen. No one looked twice at me as I walked. They never did. Years of being invisible had carved that strange kind of freedom where you could witness everything without being seen yourself. But that morning, the air felt different, heavier, like the city knew something I didn't, and it was holding its breath. I was on my way to the small antique store where I worked, a place filled with forgotten objects that seemed to understand me better than most people. I didn't own much, never had, but I liked touching things that had belonged to others. They carried whispers of lives I would never live. It was then, just before I stepped inside, that I saw him. A man, tall, wearing a coat that looked like it had been stitched from the very idea of wealth. He stood under the awning across the street, staring directly at me. Not in the passing casual way strangers sometimes do, but with an intensity that pierced. My first instinct was to look away, but his eyes held me there, still and silent, until he finally stepped forward. He crossed the street without hurry, the rain bending around him as if unwilling to touch him. "You look exactly like her," he said. It wasn't a greeting, not even an introduction. Just those words, dropped like stones into the water of my morning. I asked who he meant, but he didn't answer. Instead, he handed me a small envelope. It was heavy, sealed with dark red wax. Before I could open my mouth again, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if the city had swallowed him whole. Inside the store, I stood behind the counter, staring at the envelope for what felt like hours. My hands shook when I finally broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper and an old photograph. The photograph was sepia-toned, cracked at the edges. A woman stood in the center, elegant but unposed, her eyes sharp and knowing. She was dressed in a way that told me this picture belonged to another time, maybe 30 years ago. But it wasn't the clothes or the quality of the photo that made my breath catch. It was her face. She looked like me. The letter inside was brief, written in an elegant, almost calligraphic hand. "You have been kept from the truth long enough. The name you carry is not the one that belongs to you. If you want answers, come to 17 Calder Avenue at midnight tomorrow. Do not tell anyone." No signature. I could have thrown it away. I should have. But I'd learned to recognize the moments life placed in front of you like open doors. This felt like one of them, and like every door worth opening, it came with risk. The next day dragged in slow motion. My boss, a quiet man with a habit of speaking in half sentences, noticed I was distracted. He didn't ask why. That was one of the reasons I stayed. No one here ever pushed too far into my life. When the clock finally reached 11, I left the store and began walking toward Calder Avenue. The neighborhood shifted as I moved. The broken sidewalks gave way to smooth stone, the small apartments to towering houses behind wrought iron gates. By the time I reached number 17, the rain had stopped. The house stood like something out of a photograph, the kind meant to be admired from a distance. 3 stories, pale stone, windows glowing faintly from inside. The gates were open. A man I didn't recognize was waiting by the door. He looked me over once, then stepped aside to let me in. Inside, the air was warm, almost too warm. The scent of polished wood and old books surrounded me. And there, standing at the far end of the hall, was the man from the day before. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. I almost didn't. He led me into a room lined with shelves and a heavy desk at its center. On the desk lay several objects, more photographs, a leather-bound ledger, and what looked like a folded document tied with a ribbon. "You were born with a different name," he began, his voice measured. "A name that was taken from you before you could speak it. The woman in the photograph, her name was Eleanor Hawthorne. She was your mother." I felt my body go still. The name meant nothing to me. "I think you've made a mistake," I said. He shook his head. "I'm afraid not." Eleanor Hawthorne was the daughter of William Hawthorne, founder of Hawthorne Industries. She was disowned, disappeared from the family's public life. Years later, she had you. She died when you were 2. I wanted to laugh. It sounded absurd. But he kept speaking. You were placed into a closed adoption. No traceable records. Paid for, arranged, and buried by the Hawthorne family to avoid scandal. Your father is still alive. He is a very powerful man. And he has never acknowledged you. My hands felt cold, my voice thin. And who are you? Someone who believes you deserve to know the truth. He untied the ribbon from the folded document and placed it in front of me. This is a copy of Eleanor's will. It names you as her only heir. It also contains a letter she wrote to you, in case she couldn't raise you herself. The paper felt too heavy in my hands as I unfolded it. Her handwriting was delicate, almost fragile. "My child," it began, "you were born into a family that values power over truth. If you are reading this, it means I could not protect you from them. But you are mine. Every part of you carries my name, my blood, my strength. Do not let them erase you." The words blurred as my eyes filled. Beneath the letter was a list of items she left to me. Jewelry, journals, a trust in my name. None of it had ever reached me. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "Because the patriarch of the family is dying," he said. "When he does, the will becomes public. And you will no longer be a secret they can bury." The silence that followed felt like the weight of years pressing against my chest. I thought about my life, the jobs, the tiny apartments, the careful way I'd learned to never expect too much from anyone. And now this. It wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. And the truth was something they had stolen from me my entire life. When I finally left the house that night, the photograph of Eleanor was tucked inside my coat. The streets were quiet, the city lights blurry in the mist. I didn't know exactly what I was walking toward, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. The next morning, the city looked the same, but I didn't. Every sound seemed sharper, every stranger's glance heavier with the question they didn't know they were asking. I carried the photograph of Eleanor in my bag, as if it were a fragile piece of proof that my life had not been what I thought. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. Instead, I went to the public library, the only place I knew where silence felt like an ally, not a void. I sat at one of the wooden tables, the photograph in front of me, and began searching the archives for the Hawthorne name. It was everywhere. Headlines stretching back a century, each more grand than the last. Business expansions, charitable galas, political endorsements. Pictures of men in tailored suits and women in gowns that shimmered even in black and white print. And then, a photograph that stopped me cold. It was from 33 years ago. A formal family portrait. At the center sat William Hawthorne, sharp and unsmiling. To his right, his wife, Margaret, regal and unmoving. Around them, their children, 3 sons and a daughter. Eleanor. Her eyes were unmistakable. The same sharp gaze from the photograph in my bag, the same shape as mine. She couldn't have been older than 20. The caption below listed the names. Eleanor Hawthorne, it read, was pursuing studies abroad. I kept flipping through the years, but after that, she was gone. As if she had been erased from their history. I dug deeper, searching old newspapers and society columns. A few months after that portrait, there was a small piece buried in the back pages. Eleanor Hawthorne, youngest child of William and Margaret Hawthorne, will no longer be representing the family in public engagements. No reason, no follow-up. It was as if the city had been told not to ask questions. I copied every article, every photograph, every trace I could find. As I slid the papers into my bag, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. That evening, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. The air felt heavier with them there, as if the truth had its own gravity. I thought about the man who had given me the letter. He had known all of this, maybe more. But why now? And why me? I decided to go back to him. When I returned to the house on Calder Avenue, it was different, quieter, as if it were holding its breath. The same man greeted me at the door. "You've been looking," he said, almost smiling. "Yes," I answered. "And I have more questions." He led me back into the library. This time, a different set of items lay on the desk. An envelope sealed with the Hawthorne family crest, and a small, ornate box. The envelope contained a certified copy of my birth record. But in the space where the mother's name should have been, it was blank. The father's name was also missing. It was as if I had been born to no one at all. The box, however, was something else entirely. Inside was a gold locket. I opened it, and there she was again, Eleanor, smiling this time. On the other side, a lock of hair and the faint engraving, "For my daughter, so she never forgets." I traced the letters with my thumb, feeling the weight of them. "These are not just sentimental things," the man said. "They are evidence. Your mother wanted to keep you, but they made sure she couldn't. And when she refused to give you up quietly, they made her disappear from the world." The words sat between us like a wound. "Do they know about me?" I asked. "They suspect," he said. "But suspicion is not proof, not until you decide to show them." I wanted to ask how, but part of me already knew. If the patriarch of the Hawthorne family was dying, the reading of his will would bring the entire family together, and with them, the press. It would be the one moment they couldn't control the narrative. But the thought of standing in front of them, of having to claim a name they had worked so hard to erase, it felt impossible. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My life until now had been built on the idea that I was no one special, no one worth remembering. But what if that had been by design? What if every door that had stayed close to me had been locked on purpose? The next week passed like a shadow. I kept working at the store, kept living in my small apartment, but beneath it all was the growing weight of what I carried. The photograph, the letter, the will, the locket, all of it was hidden in a box under my bed. Then one morning, the man from Calder Avenue appeared at the store. He didn't speak much, just handed me a folded piece of paper. "The will is to be read this Saturday noon at the Hawthorne estate. If you want your truth, that is where you will find it." I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, the noise of the street outside blurring into silence. When Saturday came, the air was sharp with winter. The estate was larger than I'd imagined, a sprawling house of stone and glass set back from the road. Cars lined the driveway, each carrying people dressed in the language of money. I walked up the steps slowly, my heart steady in a way I didn't expect. Inside, the rooms were bright with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and old money. Conversations hushed as I entered. Faces turned unfamiliar, but united in their question. "Who is she?" I saw him, my father. Older now, but still imposing. He was seated in a leather chair near the fireplace, a blanket over his knees. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before sliding away. The lawyer began reading the will. Names were called, assets distributed, charities mentioned. It was all routine, all expected, until he paused, cleared his throat, and unfolded a second document. "This," he said, "is an addendum to the will, dated over 30 years ago, written by the late Eleanor Hawthorne." The room shifted. I felt every gaze tighten around me. The lawyer began to read. Eleanor's words filled the space, deliberate and unshakable. "If my child survives me, she is to be recognized as my sole heir. She is to receive all personal effects, letters, and properties in my name. Her existence is not to be denied. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick like the pause before a storm. I stood. My voice didn't shake. My name is not the one I was given, I said. My name is the one she left me, and I am here to take it back. The room did not erupt in noise. It fractured. The sound of 100 whispered questions, the scrape of a chair, the sharp intake of breath from someone who already knew. My father's face didn't move, but his eyes. His eyes betrayed something. Recognition, fear. I stepped forward, pulling from my bag the envelope, the locket, the photographs. I placed them one by one on the polished table in front of the lawyer. This is her handwriting, I said, my voice slow, deliberate. This is her will. This is her proof. And this. I opened the locket so they could see Eleanor's smiling face. This was never meant to be hidden. Margaret Hawthorne, my grandmother, sat rigid in her chair. She was all angles and frost, her pearls catching the light like teeth. This is absurd, she said, her voice a blade. Anyone can forge papers. Anyone can invent a story. Anyone can, I replied. But not everyone has birth records. Not everyone has a box of letters sealed by the woman you erased from your family's history. I met her gaze and did not look away. And not everyone looks exactly like her. The lawyer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. The will is legally binding, he said, provided the evidence holds. One of the men, my uncle, perhaps, leaned forward. What do you want? He asked, his tone dripping with the kind of contempt that only comes from never having been told no. I want the truth, I said, and I want her name returned to its place in your history. You will not pretend she never existed. You will not pretend I don't. There was a murmur, low and restless. I could feel the currents of the room shifting, not in my favor, not yet, but enough to make them uneasy. The lawyer began examining the documents. I watched his eyes move over the handwriting, the seals, the dates. He took his time, as if aware that each second stretched the tension further. Finally, he looked up. These appear to be authentic, he said, and the instructions in Eleanor Hawthorne's will are explicit. The estate is obligated to honor them. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Margaret's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. My father still hadn't spoken, though his gaze was fixed on the locket. I wondered if he recognized it, if he remembered the woman who had given it to me before I could even form words. The lawyer continued reading, listing the items and properties that now, on paper, belonged to me. The room felt smaller with each sentence, as though the walls themselves were drawing in to watch. When he finished, I gathered my things. You can keep your money, I said quietly, but you cannot keep her from me anymore. She is mine to remember, mine to speak of, and mine to carry forward. I turned to leave. No one stopped me, not even him. Outside, the winter air struck my face like a kind of baptism. The cold was clean, honest. I walked down the long driveway without looking back. That night, I returned to my apartment and laid everything out on the table once more. The photograph of Eleanor, the locket, the will. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in someone else's story. I spent the following days in quiet work. I contacted archivists, sent copies of the documents to public records offices, even submitted them to a local museum that had once hosted an exhibition on the Hawthorne legacy. The curator's voice shook when I told her there had been a missing chapter, one they had conveniently forgotten to mention. It wasn't about revenge. It was about permanence, about making sure Eleanor's name could no longer be erased with a single meeting or a carefully worded statement. One morning, a small article appeared in the city paper. Previously unknown heir of Eleanor Hawthorne emerges with irrefutable proof. There was no photo of me, just of her. That was how I wanted it. The world didn't need to see my face to know the truth. But the Hawthorns saw it, and they knew. A week later, a letter arrived at my apartment. Heavy paper, gold crest. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my father's. Inside was only one sentence. I knew about you. I did nothing. I'm sorry. I read it once and again, but the words didn't change. They didn't heal. They didn't undo the years. But they were the closest thing to an acknowledgement I would ever receive from him. And maybe, in a way, that was enough. In the months that followed, my life didn't transform into some storybook ending. I still worked at the antique store. I still took the same bus home. But there was something new inside me. A weight, yes, but also a steadiness. When people looked at me now, I met their gaze. I carried myself differently, not because of the Hawthorne name, but because I finally knew mine. And in the quiet of my apartment, on a shelf I dusted every week, sat the locket. Sometimes I opened it and spoke to her, telling her about the small victories, the ordinary days. She had been taken from me, but I had brought her back into the world, and no one could take that away again. The power they tried to keep was never in their money or their titles. It was in the ability to decide who existed and who didn't. And I had taken that power from them. For the first time in my life, I was not invisible. Spring came slowly that year, a kind of hesitant change that feels almost afraid of itself. By then, the Hawthorne name was no longer a rumor in my life. It was a fact carved into the public record. And with that fact came attention. Not the kind I wanted. Some people were curious in that shallow, gossipy way, the hidden heir who'd appeared from nowhere. Others seemed almost offended, as if I'd trespassed into a world that didn't belong to me. But there were a few quiet voices who said my mother's name with a softness that made me think they had loved her once. I kept working at the antique store, though customers came in sometimes just to stare. My boss pretended not to notice, and I pretended it didn't bother me. But it did, because I knew that to them, I wasn't a person. I was a headline they'd read over breakfast. One afternoon, as I was sorting a box of old letters for sale, I found myself staring at the handwriting of strangers. It struck me that these were the only pieces left of them, loops of ink, fading on brittle paper. It was all they had left to say, and it made me think of Eleanor's letters, of how close they had come to disappearing forever. That night, I began something new. I started writing her story. Not just the scandal the papers would print, but the truth as I knew it, the warmth I saw in her smile, the courage in her will, the way she had left me pieces of herself to find in another lifetime. I didn't write for the Hawthorns. I wrote for her. And for me. Weeks later, I received an invitation, thick cream paper, embossed with gold. It was for the unveiling of a new Hawthorne Industries building. They wanted me there. I knew it wasn't kindness. It was optics. A way to make it seem like they had welcomed me into their world. I almost didn't go. But then I thought about what it would mean to stand there in front of cameras and speak her name. Not theirs, hers. When the day came, I wore a simple black dress and the locket. I stood among the family as they smiled for the press, their bodies angled just so, their words polished to emptiness. My father was there, too, though he didn't come near me. The speeches began. The mayor spoke. My uncle spoke. And then, to everyone's surprise, the microphone was handed to me. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of 100 eyes. The crowd waited for me to stumble, to smile politely, and fade back into the background. Instead, I said, "My name is Eleanor Hawthorne's daughter. That is who I am, and who I will always be." She was more than the footnote you tried to make her. She was brilliant, stubborn, and unwilling to bow to a family that thought its name was more important than truth. You could not erase her, and you will not erase me. The silence was thick. Cameras clicked, capturing a moment they hadn't expected. I stepped back from the microphone and didn't care how they looked at me. After the event, a woman approached me quietly. She was in her 60s, dressed plainly, her eyes warm. "I was Eleanor's friend," she said softly. "She talked about you. She wanted you to know you were loved." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I managed. She squeezed my hand once before walking away. It was the first time I'd heard from someone who had known her, not through the filter of the Hawthorne name, but as a person. In the months that followed, I published the story I had been writing, not as a memoir, not as a scandal, but as a record. I called it For My Daughter. It was quiet, without dramatic revelations, but it told the truth. And slowly, people began to read it. One day, I walked into the antique store and found a copy of it sitting on the counter. My boss just shrugged. "Someone left it here," he said. But I knew better. He had placed it there, like any other object worth keeping. Years from now, when I am gone, I want it to still be here. Not so that people remember me, but so that they remember her. The Hawthorne family still exists in their world of polished stone and inherited wealth. We don't speak. We don't have to. Because I already took from them the only thing they couldn't buy back, the truth. Sometimes when I walk home in the rain, I think about the first day I saw the man who handed me the letter. I never saw him again. I don't know why he chose to bring me the truth, or why he did it then. Maybe he was someone she once trusted. Maybe he simply couldn't keep the secret anymore. It doesn't matter. Because the truth is no longer a secret. I live in a small apartment still, with shelves full of books and a table where I write. And on that table sits a photograph of Eleanor, framed in gold. Every morning, I look at it and remember that I am here because she refused to disappear quietly. Justice, I've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence of refusing to vanish. Sometimes it's just showing up, again and again, until your presence becomes undeniable. I am not wealthy. I am not part of their inner circle, but I am hers, and that is more than enough. The rain has a way of making the city look new, even when nothing has changed. And on those days, I walk with my head high, because I know exactly who I am, and because no one, not even the Hawthorns, can take that away again.